Good evening. It's so nice to see so many of you here, and it's also nice to see some unfamiliar faces, and so I want to offer you a particularly warm welcome for those of you that have come from St. Francis, those that have come from Faith Hope, those that have come from the community. My name is Jo Forrest. I'm one of the ministers on staff at Kenilworth Union Church, and this is a program that we spent Julie Peterson, raise your arm, Julie. She spent a lot of time planning with a lot of ideas and personal invitations, and this was really her brainchild. So I'm so delighted that she made the invitations and said, we need to do this because we do need to do this. Violence in the city of Chicago is something that certainly we're trying to address in so many ways, from faith communities and in agencies and in all of the outreach. And it's so much that we need to address across the country in terms of violence, of what's going on, and how poignant that we're gathering today after yet again another shooting. Kenilworth Union Church, it's a non-denominational church, so for those of you that are visiting for the first time, I've heard from a number of you saying that you've driven past but have never had a chance to come in. We're so delighted to have you here. We are an intentionally non-denominational Protestant in our worship services. And in fact, in the Bride of Day, you would see all of the windows around the sanctuary represent different denominations. And so we very much want to honor the faith traditions that brought everybody to here to worship. But that's not why we're here tonight. Actually, I guess I should say our work is our worship, because God, I believe, would be very much blessing what we're doing tonight to think about how relationships can halt violence. A few more introductions. I introduced and said thank you to Julie. I also want to give a very gracious thank you to Vic Duché and his wife Mary, who are here this evening. Raise your hand so that everybody sees. This is a first-time collaboration between Kenilworth Union and St. Francis Xavier Parish, and I hope that it's certainly not the last, and we can think of many more reasons for us to collaborate. I'll introduce Marty O'Donovan last because he's going to pray with us. I want to introduce Phil Andrew. He is the Director of Violence Prevention for the Archdiocese of Chicago. He had a long history with the FBI in anti-violence, particularly focused on gun violence, counterterrorism, counterintelligence, and crisis management. Before that, he served as Assistant General Counsel of the Chicago Housing Authority, and before that was part of the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence. So he's bringing a great deal of wisdom as well as the blessing from Cardinal Cupich to the position that he has here. And as I look out in the congregation, I know many of you know him because he is your neighbor and you know him personally. We also very warmly welcome Father Dave Kelly, who is the executive of Chicago's Precious Blood Ministry Reconciliation. He lives in the back of the Yards neighborhood, made a long trek up here, but is also going to be speaking very practically from his experience on the South Side. And then we're delighted that Nigel is joining us, and so not only will be ideas in theory, but actual personal experiences that'll be shared. I've got a short video that we're going to watch, but because the video, quite candidly, is a better explanation of Precious Blood Ministries than I could give, and it's going to be you will be able to see firsthand the kind of work that they do. Before I do that, though, I'd like to invite Father Donovan to offer us a prayer for the evening.
And let us pray. Loving God, we gather this evening as men and women of faith. Help us to reflect that faith in our determination. We ask your blessing this night to help us to strive to make the words of the familiar prayer, not simply words on a page, not simply facile things to speak, but realities in our lives. Loving God, help us truly, where there is hatred, to bring love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. But most simply, loving God, help us to recognize our commonality of purpose this night, a commonality that transcends faith traditions and causes all of us to strive to really embrace those words. Let all of us, each and every one, be instruments of your peace. Amen.
I will let a few more folks come in, and I realized I needed to come up here because I might need to dim the lights a little bit. As well as Our evening program is planned to last for about an hour. They will speak, they will, and I believe hold questions to the end, but it'll be a chance to be interactive. And then I particularly want to make an invitation for everyone to join us for a time of fellowship in our Culbertson room, which you can reach through these double doors here on your right. We'll have coffee and cookie, and we can certainly meet each other there for conversation and more personal questions and ideas that can be shared then. Let me just give folks a minute to take a seat. Is that getting a little better?
It may sound strange, but like I literally know these bricks by heart. And the reason why I say that is because when I was here, whenever we made a mistake, whenever we did something that was wrong, I remember we used to face the wall with our hands behind our back like this. And if they caught us leaning on our heads on the wall, they would prolong our time.
So how long would you have your face or your head?
Well, it depends, how it depends on the staff. There are some staff that are more known,
For minutes or months?
No, we're talking about hours. You would have to literally stand and face the wall for hours.
At that time in my career, you were my youngest client.
Oh, I didn't know that.
You were 13.
Yeah, it's true.
It wasn't a nursery school.
That's true. That's true.
You were my youngest client, and you reminded me. The first thing that struck me was this could be my child, and my heart broke. They had offered Xavier 40 years. He was looking at 60. So the deal that they offered him was 40. How can you lock a child up longer than they have been, on the planet? And he was a badass. I mean, he was. But the other thing is that when you see a 13-year-old child with that history, what it said to me was he had been neglected for a long, long time.
You're in juvenile detention, you're in a county section. So what that means, you're not in Cook County, but you're in a section that has been separated for kids who are being tried as adults. And they call that 702. And once you get that adult waiver, that transfer, you're no longer viewed as a child. And I was facing the same consequences, the same sentencing schemes that were originally designed for the worst adult offenders. So I just anticipated the worst outcome. And the individual, one of the kids on my case who was a co-defendant, received 40 years. He had only one conviction, but me, I had 19 arrests and 7 convictions. So imagine what I was anticipating in there. And so I had paced back and forth. And when she came out in tears and told me the outcome, it took me a moment to realize that it really wasn't because of the outcome, that she was in tears. It was because of the fact that she really cared.
Restorative justice is what you would want if it was your child. So if a crime happened or if your child was harmed, restorative justice tries to deal with the harm done, and how do we then heal or repair that harm without labeling the person who did the harm, the accused, without labeling that person as a menace to society, no good, thief, thug, throw him away, lock him up forever. Restorative justice embraces that person as well. Let's look at the harm done. Let's work and pour all our energy in trying to repair that harm as best we can, and holding the community and the family and the one who did it accountable as one who can help repair that harm.
Why this pain is so important and significant to me is because the person who sent it was serving life with the possibility of parole. Well, he still is, but he's up for resentencing soon. But he went in when he was 14 years old. Sometimes, when you grow up in environments that consist of violence and you're witnessing people going in and out of prison and you're constantly seeing, this sort of negative, reflection of yourself from society as a whole, it only reinforces that potential for negative outcomes.
So this is you, really, right? In this painting?
Yeah.
College degree, graduate.
Definitely, and I can see the despair, and I can see not only that, but the awareness that there is a better world out there. When I was 13 years old, I was arrested, charged, and later convicted to serve a 25-year sentence in prison for my involvement in a gang-related first-degree murder. After 13 years in prison, I came out at age 27 with a bachelor's degree, a remorseful heart, and a mission to advocate for at-risk youth. Today, I'm 38 years old, and for the rest of my life will forever be dedicated to the victim and his family as I push forward as a youth advocate and trying to help deter children from making the same mistakes that I once made. People are not really willing to invest into these communities because they're identified as violent or as poor, and there's no money here in their eyes, and not many people are working. But unfortunately, this is where these kids must grow up. I'm gonna leave you with one last thought. I was talking to a good friend. He said, would you believe, man, that it costs us $85,000 to house one child in a juvenile justice system? He said, don't you know if they gave me that same amount of money, I could literally employ three at-risk kids on the streets, full-time for $10 an hour with the help of community partners and local businesses. And oftentimes, sad enough, people look upon some of the victims in these communities and they can hardly empathize, and they just sort of see them all as in one group. Our children are not super predators. Our children are not kids to be thrown away. Our children are our future. And when I think about children in general, I think about my daughter. I think about Sophia. I want her to have a better life.
Xavier's the exception to the rule. He's an exception in the sense that in spite of the system, that he maintained some sense of focus on education, had the opportunity to do some of that education while he was locked up, and then pursued it on the outside. That's not the norm. We would be missing him on the outside. We would be missing a great asset to our young people. He gives them hope.
Good evening. My name's Phil Andrew, and you heard the introduction earlier. I've been working on violence prevention for many years. I think I probably need to step back behind I'm just going to talk and stand for a little bit. I got my start in 1988, and many of you that are from the area may recall that this was one of our first modern school shootings. A deranged woman went into a classroom in Hubbard Woods and opened fire on second graders. She had planned a large attack on the community, and it was a grim foreshadowing of what we're seeing even as late as last night. That we have a terrible problem in our country with guns and mental health, and I thought that it was going to be an easy problem to solve. I really thought that if I and some other folks on the North Shore put our heads together, that we would have resolved this in just a few years. And it looked like we could have, but there were a lot of forces working against us. And but what we learned that day, when I was shot on May 20th of '88, what I learned in the weeks just to follow is that there were 15 people shot in the city. And there was no front page article, there was no opening of the community with mental health and trauma response. There wasn't Northwestern studying it or Evanston Hospital there to wrap their arms around every nuance of what happened and build protocols for how we would respond to those shootings in the future and actually pay that forward in incidents like Columbine and those to come. There were folks in the city that didn't have any resources, that were facing that same kind of violence and the same kind of trauma that results from that violence every day. So I was really the beneficiary of growing up in Winnetka and having a community like ours that was really just wrapped its arms around me and allowed me to become the things that I still want to do. Back in '88, I was a sophomore in college. I was the captain of the Illinois swimming team, and what was more important to me than anything else was returning to those things. And I was able to do that with the help of others. I wanted to be involved in law enforcement or join the military. And eventually that became part of my life. But it really informed the way that I wanted to do that. And the work that I did at the FBI over 21 years, I worked in many different places and in different capacities. But the thing that I really was most proud of was the work we did in crisis negotiation. I ran and operated crisis negotiation teams in the various offices that I served. And one of the things that you'll learn as a crisis negotiator is that there's a very specific skill set that we deploy, that we actually train to deploy when someone is in crisis. And at the heart of that skill set is empathy. It's actually just witnessing and companionship and empathizing with somebody in their circumstances. We have a saying in crisis negotiation that emotions are universal, that you know what it's like to be angry or upset or joyful or hopeless. We all know what that is, but it's the story associated with those feelings that makes us unique. And when we take time to actually listen to that story, that's where we really build a relationship. And sort of fast forwarding through my FBI work and just this last year when I retired and saw this opportunity to work with the Archdiocese to help build out a violence prevention program, one of the things you find is that we've got a lot of gems of great work that's being done. So really, enough about my background. What I'd like to talk about briefly is kind of give you what's happening in Chicago right now. And does everybody think that Chicago is the most dangerous city in America when it comes to gun violence? This is an informed group. We're not even in the top 10 anymore. We were barely in the top 5. And one thing that I want to tell you is we actually live in the safest time ever in our country. That violence is down across our country. There are a few places where violence has spiked. And then within those places, there are very, very micro areas that violence has spiked. So in Chicago, in correlation with New York and LA, and we're going to talk a little bit about them because there's some investment and there's some actions going on in those cities that Chicago is just now getting started with. In basically about 10 years ago, there was a departure in the crime rates in New York, LA, and Chicago. Chicago continuing up as New York and LA have now driven down their homicide rates to record lows. And what it was a major investment in violence prevention. They started spending millions of dollars in getting upstream and providing services to folks using some of what you just saw in the video. The other thing that happened is there was a lot of law enforcement strategy involved. Both New York and LA 10 years ago were subject to consent decrees. The federal court, the Justice Department, had brought a case of civil rights against those police departments and over 10 years forced them to reform and bring in modern policing strategies and different strategies for supporting police as they do difficult work to make sure that they've done the self-care and there's the management and there's the training in place for them to do that difficult work. Chicago did not do that. So there's a lot of explanations of why, and what we saw is basically a spike in 2016, where we had one of our worst years in decades in terms of homicides in Chicago. And the good news is that we're down about 20% since that spike in 16. Now in 18, if the numbers continue, we're down 20%, but that's still a big number of homicides, particularly compared to New York and LA. And one of the reasons that we are seeing that reduction is something called the Partnership for Safe and Peaceful Communities. Has anybody heard of that? We got two hands. and I told him about it, so he doesn't even count. The Partnership for Safe and Peaceful Communities is basically been a 3-year commitment of roughly almost $40 million a year by our largest and even some of our smallest foundations. So Joyce Community Trust, MacArthur, Polk Brothers, Brock Foundation, all the names that you know from growing up. They came together, 30 of them, and have made an investment over 3 years to basically build the capacity in models that New York and LA have invested in, primarily invested in with public dollars. So through the course of that, and one of the project partners is Precious Bread Ministries, and Father Kelly talk about that. But that represents job training, outreach, like literal outreach where people are going out to street corners and engaging people that are in open air drug markets and talking to them about their lives and what kind of substitutes there could be in the same way that you heard about. They're going to shootings and they're talking to victims and they're talking when they can find them, perpetrators, and they're engaging them and talking to them about what those alternatives are. It involves a whole continuum of care for folks that are violence affected. Now, statistically, the folks that are willing to pull a trigger and shoot at somebody and the folks that are getting shot in Chicago is less than 0.03%. So there's roughly 3,000 to 4,000 youth between the ages of 14 and 28 that are likely to shoot and be shot. It's actually the same group because perpetrators and victims actually reside in the same group. So the problem, in many ways, is very small. And if I showed you a graph tonight of the difference between what we might say is a safe area of Chicago and we might say is an unsafe area that has homicides, the gap is very great. And that's what also is very distinctive about Chicago in comparison to New York, LA, Milwaukee, and other cities that are struggling with this. And the point there being is that there are very isolated places, and you've heard about them. This is Austin. This is back of the yards. This is Englewood. This is West Garfield. And these pockets on the south and west side that there's been an incredible disinvestment, both from a civic standpoint and I've got to say even from a religious standpoint. The Catholic Church in the largest populous community of Chicago, Austin and West Garfield. More people live there than any other part of the city. There's one parish. We have one church left there. So we've pulled out two, but there's a lot of building and space there that could be. And we're actually working with some of our partners now to reconstitute some of those buildings for this peace work, for this outreach, for the concentrated efforts around job training and mental health and coaching. Actual personal coaching, the really intensive walking with somebody. So my point to you tonight is that the hard work has begun in Chicago, and it's making progress. And this is the time that we need to double down on our investment. We need to build the capacity of these organizations that are doing this hard work. And make no bones about it, this is as hard a work as can be done. This is very, very difficult work, and there's no way of leveraging technology to make that easier. There's no way of expanding the number of people that one person could talk to. It's really very personalized, and it's as proximate and about relationship building as you can get. So I wanted to set that sort of scene for you as you hear from Dave Kelly. Dave Kelly runs Precious Blood Ministries. It's one of those programs in the Partnership for Safe and Peaceful Communities. It runs very similar to what you've heard from Father Greg Boyle, who runs Homeboy Industries out in LA. It's very similar to the model that Chicago Cred, that's run by Arnie Duncan. It's about reaching people who need some opportunities and intensively surrounding him with those services. I'd like for him to talk a little bit about the program.
So, this is awful loud. I'm Dave Kelly. I'm a Catholic priest. Been a Catholic priest for 36 years. But even before I was a priest, all my adult life, I've been working in jails and detention centers. I continue to work for Colby House and have worked for Colby House since the beginning of Colby House in the early 80s. Colby House is the jail ministry of the Archdiocese of Chicago. Worked alongside Larry Craig, who was the founder of Colby House. And Colby House is a parish-based jail ministry. In other words, it's not at the Myers Center or downtown at Quigley Center. It's in the community, a community that's been impacted by violence and incarceration. It lives within a parish. Because Larry Craig, the founder of Colby House, thought that what people need who are locked up the most is a sense of community, a sense of welcome, a sense of people around them who care about them. And so he wanted to put this ministry, this jail ministry of the Archdiocese, in a parish. And because I was there for 20-some years, I would accompany a lot of young people, a lot of families who lost their child to incarceration. Young people like Xavier that you saw on the video. Young people, he didn't lose his life to incarceration, but has been impacted by incarceration. Nigel, who is with me here tonight. And some of those would lose their child to incarceration for long periods of times, 50, 60, life without the possibility of parole. And I'd accompany those families in the trauma of trying to live your life and having one of your children get that kind of time. But because I was in a parish, I also did an incredible amount of funerals for young people, 16, 17, 18, 19 years old. And oftentimes, as Phil said, when you're in this community, you know both sides. You know the person who did the harm, and oftentimes you know the person who was harmed. And they come from the same community. And some of those cases in which I would know both the one who was harmed and the one who did the harm were very personal to me. One such case was a young man, Alberto, used to come to the after-school program all the time at the parish. And the after-school program was on the first floor, my office was on the second floor. And he'd come around through the back way to get out of school, out of the after-school program, to come up to my office and talk a little bit, and I'd shoo him back down to the program. But I got a call one night that about 5 minutes after he left, that he had been shot. So I go to the scene, and from the scene to the hospital, and one of the bullets hit his heart, and so he was in very critical condition. He had to have open heart surgery. And I was there with his family, kind of holding vigil, praying, hoping that he would recover. I'd come to the hospital on a daily basis and sit with him, hoping that he would recover. About day 3 or 4, he did begin to recover, and the police came to do their investigation. They had that manila file folder that they often carry, and they went to Alberto and they opened the file folder because they wanted him to identify the person they had in custody for a shooting. And when they opened the file folder, I recognized the young man who they had in custody, someone I also knew very well. And so the police left. I stayed around the hospital a bit longer, and then I went from the hospital room to Cook County Jail, Division 9, in the maximum security part of the jail, to visit Wilfredo, the young man they had in custody. And when Wilfredo saw me come in on the living deck, he saw me from afar, and he had this look like, damn, I knew you were coming. Because by then he had already known that the person he shot was someone who was part of the parish, part of the after-school program, someone that I had a relationship with. But he also had the look that there was finally somebody coming in here who cared about me as a human being. And so I would talk to Alfredo, and I'd go from the jail cell to the hospital room, and the hospital room to the jail cell. And the thing about that was that Alberto knew that when I left his hospital room that I was going to go to the jail to visit the person who shot him. And Wilfredo knew that when I left that jail cell that I was going to the hospital to visit with the person who would ultimately testify against him in court. And both thought that was not unusual. Both understood that because that's who we were, that we embraced both the one who had harmed and the one who did the harm. About 2.5 years later, when they went to court, Alberto and his mom and I went, and we had to sit in a small room adjacent to the courtroom because Alberto was going to testify in court, and he couldn't hear the testimony of the other witnesses. And so we were in this small room, and a young state's attorney comes in. He's prepping Alberto for his testimony. And he said, Alberto, this is what you got to say. We really want to get this kid good. We want to send him away from prison for the rest of his life. So this is what I need you to say. And he kept saying, and we really want to send him away. And he said that a few times, and I just leaned over to Alberto and I said, Alberto, just tell the truth. And this young state's attorney got very angry at me for interfering with his preparation. And anybody who knows me very well knows that if I get very angry, I turn very red. And then a few choice words will come out. Ultimately, we did go to trial. And Wilfredo, the young man accused, was given 27 years in prison. And the case was over, and we're walking back to my office there to their apartment. When I got to my office, I just sat there in the office and with this kind of a stinking feeling in my gut. And I couldn't help but to think how wrong all that was. Because during that whole time, those 2.5 years, no one ever said to Alberto, hey, Alberto, how you doing? Is there something we can do for you? Is there any way we can help? All the attention, all the resources was focused on Wilfredo and how we're going to really get this guy. We're going to get him good because we never want him to do it again, and we're going to get him really good because we don't want others to do it. We want it to be a deterrent. And I thought, as a person who lived in that community and as a faith-based person, that we can do better than this. So in 2002, I had the opportunity with some others to start this Ministry of Reconciliation, this Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation. It's not the name I would choose, but I happen to be a member of the Congregation Missionaries of the Precious Blood, so go figure. And that's too late now to change it. But it's a ministry based on trying to live within a community and create a space, a place where people can heal, both the one who has been harmed, but also the one who has done the harm. And early on, I thought it's reconciliation, so it's healing and building new relationships. And from the very beginning, we embraced a restorative justice philosophy. Restorative justice is a philosophy that embraces this reconciliation, the gospel mandate to go out and heal and bring people in and not exclude them. It's a philosophy that says if there's harm, let's tend to the harm. Let's try to heal. And let's not just focus on the wrongdoer and how we can punish our way out of this. We can't. We won't. We never will. And yet that's where all our resources go to. So Precious Blood tries to be an alternative, if you will, to the criminal justice system in many ways. In fact, we work with the criminal justice system in a pilot project in which some young people from this particular jurisdiction, our local judge, the case would be sent to us, for lack of a better word, sentencing circles. So the young person was accused, was found guilty or pled guilty, and then had the option of having the community do the sentencing or the judge do the sentencing. And so some of these cases were faxed to us, and we'd go out and we'd interview and see if this is something that the young person and the families wanted to do, and as well as the person who was the victim of that case. In one particular case, this one young man was arrested for a burglary and detained. Then he was let go on house arrest with that little monitor they have on their leg. And we got this fax that this would be a good case for a restorative justice process, a peacemaking circle we call it. It's a practice of restorative justice. And so I went to Deontay's home and visited with he and his mom. And I said to him, now look, this is what you might encounter. So you'll sit in the same space as the person whose home you burglarized. And we'll have other community people there. And we'll talk about what happened. Are you good with that? And his mom said, yeah, he's real good with that. That's what he wants to do. And I said, well, Deontay, do you want to do it? And he too wanted to do it. And I kind of explained to him about what it would look like, kind of painted the picture, if you will. And I said, Deontay, what do you want to say to him? What do you want to say to this guy whose home you burglarized? And he said, I just want to tell him I'm sorry. And so I said, okay. So I went to Mr. Wallace, who's the person whose home was burglarized, who happened to be a police officer. Not the brightest move on this kid's part. But asked him, do you want to do this? And he says, yeah, I do. I want this young man to understand what he did. And so we made the arrangements. We sat in the space at Precious Blood on the second floor of this old school building. And we sat in this room, and there was Deontay and his mom, and Mr. Wallace, and the family person that he brought with him. We had a retired school principal from our neighborhood. We had a coach from the local high school. We had some young people there because I didn't want Deontay to be the only person in there, the young person. And we sat and we created community in a circle. It's a practice. And you open with a ritual, and you open with relationships. You don't just get to the case. You say, who are we in this space? And one of the things you do is do this ribbon ceremony in which you have a strand of ribbon and you're asked, who's been somebody important to you that's really taught you well? And you go around using a talking piece and you share that person. Deontay talked about his mom who sat right next to him. He didn't know his father, and she was always there for him, even when he messed up. And when the talking piece got around, Mr. Wallace said, you know what? Me too, my mom and my grandmom were always the people there for me. I didn't know my father. And as we went around and we talked about relationships, you could see physically the difference in that circle. In the beginning, Mr. Wallace was kind of like this, like, what are you going to say to convince me of anything? But after we started telling stories, Deontay told stories about how he loved to play basketball, but how he'd been expelled from school and no longer could play basketball and how hard that was on him. And how the mom would talk about having a 17 African-American kid go out the door and wonder if he'll ever come home again, and the strain and stress of that kind of living. And as we told these stories, people started to engage with one another and start to look at each other. And I asked Mr. Wallace, what was the harm? And he says, you know, everybody says it's the broken door and the computer that was stolen. He says, I got insurance. He says, the real harm? He says, I have a 5-year-old, and I vowed if I had children, I was going to create a space that my child would always feel safe. He says, after this burglary, and he looked right at Deontay, he says, my son, my 5-year-old came to me and says, Daddy, I don't want to live here no more. And he said, I had to send my son to his grandmother, my mother, for 5 days before I could convince him to come home. That's what you did. And of course, Deontay just looked at him. Every time the talking piece came around, Deontay said how sorry he was. Authentically, this kid was apologetic. So I asked Deontay, what happened? How did you burglarize this home? He says, you know, I just got these friends, and I kept saying no, but this one time I said, okay, I'll be a lookout. And I was a lookout, and he got caught, and he got arrested. And he kept saying how sorry he was. So I asked Mr. Wallace, what do you need? What do you want? What would help? He said, man, I don't need anything else. I got what I needed. He really accepted the authentic apology of a Deontay. But then he said, man, wait a minute, I do need something. He looked right at Deontay and he said, Deontay, I need you to go to school. I need you to get back in school. You seem like a great kid. Look, you have a mother that loves you and people that are there for you. You've got to get back in school. And so in Chicago, of course, if you're expelled from school, you don't go back to a public school. You go to an option school. But in Chicago also, it's not what you know, it's who you know, and there was a retired school principal there. So she said, you know, I could probably get him into school again. So the sentence was, Deontay would go to school, the principal would make sure he got into school, he would do well, and he'd come back and report to us. So we closed the circle, and everybody's packing up, I was packing things up, and Mr. Wallace went over to Deontay to give him his card. He said, Deontay, I'm not just a cop, I'm also a coach, let's go hoop it together. And Mr. Wallace became the mentor of the young man. I've been to court 1,000 times, more than 1,000 times. I've never seen that happen. I've really rarely seen a victim be able to talk about what the real harm was. It's usually a code of conduct of some long number, CR, or something. And in this case, Mr. Wallace was able to express what really was the harm. And Deontay was able to try as best he could to repair that harm. And both walked away with this sense of satisfaction. So we are working hard on trying to create an alternative to the punitive criminal justice system. And because Deontay lived a little bit distant of precious blood, we wanted other partners, because while we wanted to continue the relationship with Deontay, because he didn't live right in our community, it was a little bit difficult. So we started to partner with other organizations to embrace a restorative philosophy, other organizations that wanted to work with this population of young people. And what we have today is what we call the Community Restorative Justice Hubs. There's 8 hubs really, out in different parts of the community that are impacted by violence and incarceration. It's a community being able to respond and be held accountable for what's happening within their own community, and to come together not in a punitive way, but in a restorative way, to really focus on healing. And I suggest to you that's what we should be about, is really creating these spaces and these places where healing is possible, where communities can be held responsible and yet have the resources necessary to be able to respond, to kind of build those relationships and connections. You know, quickly, in the Catholic schools, Catholic churches, and most of the Christian traditions, we do wonderful with ritual. We do incredible rituals, and Holy Thursday and Good Friday, and during that period of time, we do wonderful work. And we do the Holy Thursday, the Last Supper, and then the Good Friday, and the Veneration of the Cross, and then as soon as, if anybody's been part of a liturgy team, as soon as that last Good Friday service is over, the cross comes down and the lilies come out, and we prepare for the Easter Vigil. You go from the crucifixion to the resurrection, from the shouts of crucify him to alleluia in about a day and a half. And I suggest to you, you don't move from trauma to joy and resurrection in a day and a half. And as church, we ought to live in that Holy Saturday moment, in the wake of the crucifixion and that trauma, and not gloss over it, not say, oh, you get better, you have other children, or whatever we say, to allow that trauma to be there, to touch the woundedness of people, but yet be hope-filled. The resurrection is coming. To stand in that space and to create a space for folks who've been hurt and harmed and traumatized to be able to express their needs, their hopes, their dreams in a listening and caring community. We've got to build communities of hope. And what we're striving to do on the south side of Chicago is to build such of those communities and bringing people in and really creating an environment where healing and reconciliation is possible. I think I'll stop there. And I'm just going to ask Nigel, because he's sitting up here in such a good way, and I have to drive home with him, so if I just cut him off, it was going to be pretty. So just to talk a little bit how you got to Precious Blood.
Okay, hello, how y'all doing? My name is Nigel Lee. I'm 19 years old now, and when I first started coming to Precious Blood, I think I was about like 12 or 13. And how I got there is because my first case ever, I had broken into a shoe store, and I had to do what is called?
Community service.
Community service at the center, and I had to do 40 hours. And when I was going back and forth to the center doing my community service hours, I was a kid in poverty, you know, that had both parents in the house, a lot of kids, you know, not enough support. It was a lot of stuff that the center had that I didn't have in the house, you know, the Precious Blood, that's what we call the center. And after I did my community service hours, I just kept coming back because it's like everything I ever asked for, not everything, but everything I ever needed, and that Father Kelly and them seen I needed, they gave it to me, you know, and I didn't have it at the house. So just imagine how much of an impact that had on me for me to stay there all that time. And I started when I was like 12 or 13, and I'm 19 now. I recently just got out in June 29th for residential burglary. I was 16 when I got locked up, 19 when I got out. I did 2 years, 2 years and some months. And it had an impact on me. You know, I was 16, that's a long time. They gave me 4 years, and it was only for a residential burglary. They gave me juvenile life for a residential burglary. And I thought it was a lot. Father Kelly thought it was a lot. Everybody thought it was a lot, but the justice system didn't think it was a lot. They just gave out my rest of my juvenile life to the system. They thought it was okay, but while I was in there, I made the best of it. I was in there self-advocating for myself. It's kind of hard for me to talk about. I don't know why. This is the first time it ever happened, but I don't know what Father Kelly was just saying. It made me a little emotional about the background of the little boy, Devontae, because I was thinking of myself. But growing up, I never had money, never had a lot of family help. I always had friends. That's the only thing. And Father Kelly, that's the only thing I ever had. Friends and Father Kelly. And like, I look at stuff like, what if I did have it? Because if I did have it, I probably wouldn't even be here talking to y'all. I probably would have been, I'm in college now, but I probably would have been in college, you know. But growing up, I used to steal a lot. Like, I break in the house, go to jail, and get locked up 2 weeks later for the same stuff. Steal cars, do anything just to some of it was for attention. You know what I'm saying? Just to, oh yeah, that's the little boy that do that. And I used to like that because I never had nobody to show me attention. You know what I'm saying? But as I was locked up, I self-advocated for myself because I graduated while I was locked up. Look, okay, so I graduated when I was locked up, and they had moved, after I graduated, they moved my deck to a deck where the older guys was at, the older big guys that was all out of high school. And we just used to sit on the deck all day and don't do nothing. And I was like, wait, hold on, something wrong with this. Like, why is we just sitting here? Like, it's other kids, because we in jail, who want to sit on the cottage all day? At least we want to go to school, you know what I'm saying, just to move around. And we used to see other kids going to school that ain't graduated yet. We used to be like, dang, all right, we graduated. Well, we can't do nothing now. So we get punished for graduating. That's basically how it was. We had to sit on the deck all day for graduating after we graduated. So I used to just ask administrations, like, is there anything y'all can do to get me in school, college? I wanted to do college. I really wanted to do college. And they kept telling me, like, no, 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 no. I don't think I told Father Kelly this, but, well, I told him how. Okay, let me tell y'all first. So after I kept asking, they kept denying me. Some told me, like, go to the library. One day I went to the library. I don't know how I got there because I wasn't supposed to leave off the deck. I just went. I don't know how. And I just looked for a law book. And it say, by law, juveniles that's in custody, they gotta have some type of education. I don't know how I just looked in the index and I found what I was looking for. I found stuff that led up to it. And I checked out the book and I brought it back. And the assistant administrator of programs named Michael Bird, I brought it to his attention and I was like, look, this say I gotta go to college. I'm in y'all custody. So what we finna do? Like, y'all finna take this lawsuit or I'm finna go to college? You know what I'm saying? So he was like, and he got like this nonchalant vendetta. Like, he curious. So he was like, and I felt like he was gonna tell me no. So that's when rage. I was like, well, look, I ain't trying to hear it. I'm gonna just go beat people up if y'all don't take me to school, and I'm gonna call my lawyer. You know what I'm saying? So he was like, well, no, no, no. And he called the director of the whole IDJJ. And he came to me like a week later, and he was like, well, Mr. Lee, I got something for you. I was like, what you got? He took out his phone, because in jail, the administrator, they had a phone. He took out his iPhone, and he put it to my glass window in my cell. And he was like, read this. And I read it, and it was a letter saying that the director said she partnered with the chairman, I think at Malcolm X, and they somehow made a way for me to go to college from jail. So every other day, I used to wake up in my jail clothes in the jail cell, put on clothes, real clothes, and go out the door and go to Malcolm X College. And I did that for months. Thank y'all. And my first semester, all A's and B's. You know what I'm saying?
Man.
All A's and B's. I got a chance to start the next semester a little bit before I got out, and I finished that all A's and B's. I'm a sophomore in college now. But basically, the message I'm trying to say is, like, I went to jail. I self-advocate. Well, at first when I got there, I was being bad. I ain't had nothing to live for. I was thinking, like, well, I got to do 4 years. What can I do? You know what I'm saying? I got down there, fighting a little bit. I talked to this male nurse that was just walking down the hall. He was walking down the hall in plain clothes, and it was a jail facility, so it caught my attention. I was like, what are you doing? I asked him, like, what are you doing? You know what I'm saying? Ain't nobody know what he was doing. I seen the nurse, a lady nurse. I was like, well, who was that guy that was walking past in his regular clothes earlier? And they was like, well, he's a new intern. He's a paramedic, and he's trying to be a nurse. You know, and I forgot who asked me what I wanted to be in life, and I told them a nurse. And they asked me where I wanted to work, and I told them a jail. And that's the reason why I want to work in a juvenile jail facility after I get my certification of being a registered nurse, because he influenced me to actually advocate for myself to get in college to be a nurse. And that's basically my story, y'all.
Thanks, man.
I know we're going to visit for a little bit afterward, but we'd be happy to take some questions or clarify anything for folks. Sorry, you're next.
Obviously, the justice system needs to be involved in some capacity, and obviously the news that you hear about the agreement with the Chicago police and some of the justice people advocating against it. How are you managing with that in that kind of environment? Are they cooperative in terms of the kind of sentencing that might formally be punitive?
Well, there's a lot of reform efforts going on. So one piece is the consent decree. So the Justice Department, under the prior administration, filed a civil rights lawsuit against the Chicago Police Department. That is currently in federal court. The Justice Department dropped that case when the administration's changed, but the state attorney general has stepped up to be a party in that case. So it looks like we're still going to get a consent decree. The consent decree will allow for a federal judge to oversee, with outside expertise, the reforms that have basically taken place in other police departments around the country. Now, those reforms we're going to have to work on other policy reforms that affect the justice system and make restorative justice more available. But one of the things is that it already is available. It's a question of advocating and making sure folks know that it's available. So that when we kind of break down what we need to do to address this, I think the first piece is advocacy. We need firearm policy regulations that match our problem. We need to regulate gun dealers, and we need to eliminate assault weapons. We need background checks on anybody buying a gun. We have to stop the illegal flow of guns into areas that are already suffering and have a lot of trauma. Throwing guns into that environment doesn't help. We also need to make sure that we lock up guns in our own home, because when we talk about the big picture of gun violence, the vast majority is suicides and accidental deaths. Homicides are a small part of our problem in the country, and that has all to do with access to firearms. So in many ways, that's the easy piece. The second piece we need to advocate for is that justice reform, and to make sure that we do the hard work that the consent decree creates an opportunity for. And the last piece in advocacy is that I think we need to look at publicly financed models that support this work, that we can't rely on philanthropy in Chicago to be doing the heavy lifting that other jurisdictions have come up with funding models that make this part of the way we do business. So those three pieces. In terms of the work that has begun, from my vantage point, it's really about collaborating and coordinating, and then building a consciousness with people like you to know that the capacity of groups like Father Kelly's Precious Blood can only grow with your support. They need both your financial support, but in many ways they need things like a job interview or a practice job interview, or maybe board service. Somebody who really can think through how to grow a 1.7 million group that's employing 17 to 24 people on grants and the up and down of the grant cycle. How does it grow to do twice as much work, or maybe expand its services into another neighborhood? Those are business problems. Those are organizational problems that the skills you have. Could you be a grant writer? Could you help them write a human resource handbook? So as they onboard new employees, he's not pulling from his ministry time, the time that he's actually interfacing with people to do this administrative stuff. So it really is about growing organizations and their capacity to do the great work. And there's a few great groups that are doing this work among many. We do probably need a little consolidation in the space, so that we get the cost benefits of one human resource person, one grant writer overseeing this. There's a lot of little groups doing this work in Chicago, and some really well and some not so well. But triaging into the neighborhoods that are most affected by building the capacity of the organizations that are doing that work is really key for us. Oh, another question.
The folks that were interviewed, the young man that's here and likewise in the video, are exceptional people, it seems. There's that inner drive that makes them not want to just sit, to actually go out and do something to better oneself. I wonder if the programs that you're talking about turn out a lot of ordinary people into exceptional in that regard. Or are these the folks that would rise to the top in almost any situation? I'm a little troubled by the testimony of having folks who seem exceptional and then to try to apply it to the general case. Maybe you have lots of folks who have succeeded in these ways.
I think that the numbers, and I'll let Father Kelly talk about the number of people that they touch and the success of those programs. But the idea that maybe this is that Nigel is an exceptional person, there's no question. And people that have navigated trauma in their life tend to be incredibly resilient people. And they tend to be real assets to the organizations that invite them and use their talent. Maybe you want to speak to some of the folks the lives that you touched and the success that you see.
I think that if you look at this as a public health issue, that trauma is at the very core of so much of what we're doing. And if you start to heal the hurt, hurt people. And our take on the violence prevention is to start to heal some of the hurt in the lives of these young people so that they're part of the solution, not part of the problem. And I don't think, no offense, Nigel, but you're not all that exceptional. You're one of many people in our community that, given the chance and given the platform, can really be part of the solution, and frankly, are part of the solution. And I think the other piece of this is that we who have choices in our lives, I'm a better human being. I'm a better priest. I'm a better man because of my being able to live and meet people like Nigel for all my adult life. And so I need this as much as he needs what we might have to offer. It's a mutuality, as Greg Boyle says. It's mutual. We both walk away as beneficiaries. As in that case I was talking about Deontay and the police officer, they both walked away feeling like they benefited, they won. And that's rare in the world that we live in.
And the need, the desire to collaborate and for many of them at once. Is there similar multiplication of efforts in the courthouse? Is that a focus where you are meeting with receptive judges for this sort of justice? Is there what's going on at that level that is inviting to this philosophy?
Father Kelly and I both serve on a committee of restorative justice that's working to expand that, both in training in certain communities. Now the third class, the entire class started 2 years ago at Leo High School, has been trained in restorative justice. Everybody involved in any kind of discipline and their administration has been trained in restorative justice. Leo High School is right in the center of one of our most violence-affected neighborhoods. So both building that capacity within the community to desire it, because the restorative justice model actually takes place in the community. And then there's a lot of work where we're working directly with some retired judges who are doing outreach in the judicial community to build their consciousness where they're more willing to refer it. And Cook County has actually created a couple courts that are designed to work directly with restorative models. But expanding that is important.
I think my experience is that many judges, if not most judges, that if they had an alternative, that they would use it. They just don't believe that the community is capable of holding young people accountable. And I think that's where it's a relational part. We're able to do so much of what we're able to do because the judges in our particular locale kind of know us and trust precious blood. And I don't think that's the exception. I think there's a lot of good work being done out there that if judges would be more willing to get to know what's in their community, because in Chicago it's geographical, that then they would be able to say, you know, it'd be better, rather than send this kid to detention for 3 months, where he doesn't go to school and all those kinds of things, let's send him to Precious Blood. Let's ensure that he gets these kinds of program, trauma-informed care, and probably with a lot less cost, of course, than he would walk out with a connection to his community. You know, one of the things people always ask is measurements, and you know, how do you know it's working? And the kind of the go-to thing is recidivism. Did he get locked up again? And I'm not a big one on recidivism because I think that has as much to do with policing as it does the activity of a young person. I measure how connected is this young person to his community? How many more times per week is he going to school? How much better is he doing in school? Because I believe that if you feel like you belong, then you're a co-creator. But if I feel like I don't belong anywhere, that this ain't my community, then I am more apt to do harm to that community. But if I belong and it's mine, I'm going to take care of it.
And just to expand on that a little bit, I think that restorative model has great utility in a lot of other aspects of life. One of my roles in violence prevention at the Archdiocese is really to introduce that into our school system and to move away from this punitive system and much more of an empathy-based restorative model. With our own kids in grade school and knowing what happens on a playground and wishing that this is what might be the way children are trained and to think about resolving conflict, preparing them for a conflict-ridden world with an actual skill set of seeking to understand, like our opening prayer, as opposed to somebody's got to win and lose here, and then you're the bad kid. And as soon as somebody gets labeled as the bully, they almost become the victim themselves in the way that we pile on that. Like, oh, it's all that person's. If we could just get that kid out of the class, wouldn't it be such a special little classroom? Until we find the next kid, and then we got none left. Instead of really training on this in skill, there are corporations. There are, in the Catholic model, as we're looking at Renew My Church, where we're consolidating parishes and closing parishes and asking them to work together. This skill set is the heart of it. And what really is remarkable to me is how Father Kelly and I have really approached this in our careers from really opposite ends of the spectrum. But what has worked is this, it has the same DNA. It's this empathy-based restorative work that you have to use in a crisis. And guess what? You walk out in a relationship. Other questions?
You're talking about what happens after the crime. But a lot of these crimes are prevented with guns and jump out of the community. And I know people in this community are like, what can we do? This is a whole world away from the west side and the south side. What can people do here? Well, I imagine a lot. In any way, if you work in politics, local money, time, the bottom line should be, is there any connection to the NRA? If you get dime from the NRA, do they accept any endorsements from the NRA? If there's any connection whatsoever, that's it. They are off limits to support the opposition. Because we're never going to get gun reform until the power of the NRA is going to do it. You know, and that starts with influence.
I have nothing to add to that. Next question.
I was just going to say, you know, another way that we can make a difference in trying to prevent violence and all the things that come from that world and that lifestyle is, and again, on the prevention side, is become youth mentor. You know, I have I'm coordinator of a youth mentoring program at Catholic Charities, and it's pretty amazing, if I do say so myself, because we match adult volunteer mentors with really at-risk kids, 9 to 12-year-old kids who live in Waukegan in very challenging circumstances. And it's amazing. You really can make a difference in just one child's life. And to speak to something you said, Father Kelly, about it, it goes both ways. It's not only you can transform a child's life, it can transform the mentor too. And I've had so many mentors say that I feel like I get just as much out of this as my kid does.
Thank you for sharing that.
But I just would like to add one thing, like everything that's going on, like all the violence and stuff, and all the kids, how they doing all this stuff. It's not about they don't got jobs or all that. That play a big part. Don't get me wrong, but it's just about like social skills. Like a lot of kids in our hood, in our neighborhood, they don't know how to talk to people at all. They don't even know how to carry themselves. Like it's kids that would have got up here and would have just and walked off. Like they wouldn't know what to say. They wouldn't know how to carry themselves. If y'all have a one-on-one conversation, they'd be a little distant because y'all not from our hood. They don't know y'all. Like just whenever, like if y'all could work with them, like on some social, like teach them how to talk, teach them how to go do a job interview, teach them how to talk fluently. You know, teach them how to stop saying teach them, you know what I'm saying? For real. Like, and that'll help a big part, because once you teach them how to do that, then they'll know how to open up, they'll know how to talk, they'll know how to think outside the box of how to get around a conversation or how to start a conversation or how to keep one going. They don't know how to do that type of stuff.
I think one of the things that says is you got to value him. We have to value Nigel, value his wisdom, that he has something to say. Too many times I've been in a group about youth violence and there's no youth. It's all old people sitting around, and you know how that goes, nowhere. But we have to engage young people and trust and value their opinion, that they have something to say to this issue, because they're at the very root of this.